In part two, we're going to talk about how nationalism was both a unifying and dividing force in Europe during the 1800s. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about that. And that is our essential question. How was it a unifying and dividing force in Europe during the 1800s? And it really came down to what the makeup of your empire was when it came to cultural identities. If you were the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, nationalism was a dividing force. It tore your country apart because you had many different cultural identities and they weren't really all working for the same team. In fact, they wanted to be their own country in a lot of these examples. Let's take the Austrian Empire for our first example here. In the Austrian Empire, we saw that the country is big, it's enormous, it's somewhat powerful, but it has a lot of different people in it. So Austria in itself, let me get a better color here. Austria in itself, the part of Austria where people were actually spoke Austrian and had an Austrian cultural identity was this big right here. Now that's just a tiny piece of this bigger empire. Look at, for example, there's actually a larger part of this empire that considers itself Hungarian than actually does Austrian. And you have Croatians and Slavonians down here. You have Bosnians and Herzegovinians. You have Transylvanians and Romanians over here. Lots of Anians. Bohemians, which were kind of a different kind of German over here. You get the idea, but each one of the different colors on this map represents a different cultural identity, where they might have spoken a different language than German, they might have different customs than the Austrians, and they don't necessarily want to be told by the Austrian emperor what to do and how to live their life. If given the choice, any one of these parts right here in a different color would rather have their own country. So when the Austrian emperor tells these parts of the Austrian Empire to get behind him and join the army and follow his lead, nobody really wants to do that because they don't really feel a connection. They don't feel like they owe any allegiance to the Austrian emperor, and that is a problem for this empire. Same thing in Russia. Let's look at the Russian Empire. Once again, each one of these colors is a different cultural identity or a different territory controlled by the Russian Tsar, which is the same thing as an emperor in Russia. So, for example, we have in the yellow all the areas of Russia. Sorry about that. All the areas of Russia that were actually Russian right here. Not a huge one. You could count this whole big area of Siberia, but to be honest with you, not a lot of people live there. It's cold. It's not an enjoyable place. So even though a lot of the Russian Empire was considered to be Russian, not everybody was. We've listened to Sibelius's Finlandia because Finland was part of the Russian Empire. The Finns did not speak Russian. They resented the Russians. They didn't want to be part of it. Same thing over here. This area right here, Poland. These are Poles. Polish is their language. They have a different cultural identity. They don't want to be part of the Russian Empire. Over here, parts of modern-day China called Manchuria were under Russian control. Russians controlled the Turkmenistan area, the Kyrgyzstan area. Again, different cultural identities, different language, different history, different culture, and even parts right up around the Ottoman Empire, Georgia, Albania, over here in this area right here. But you get the idea. Each one of these parts, like Austria, different cultural identity, didn't really want to be part of the Russian Empire, didn't really feel an allegiance to the Russian Tsar. So the Russian Tsar has a very hard time controlling all these different people. He's actually pretty brutal to them because of that, because he needs to crack down and get them to do what he says. And the Ottoman Empire is the third example here. Again, each one of these different colors, a different type of person, different type of cultural identity within the same empire. Turkey is the main controlling part of the empire. But over here, if you live in modern-day Iraq, you speak Arabic instead of Turkish. You're probably a different sect of Islam than the Muslims in Turkey, and you don't really feel a lot of loyalty, a lot of love for the Sultan here in Turkey. Same thing for Egyptians down here. Same things for Tunisians, for those in modern-day Libya right here, Libyans. And then even up in Europe, Greece, until 1830 was part of the Ottoman Empire. They spoke Greek. They were Greek Eastern Orthodox Christians, very different from Turks. Albanians, Serbians, Romanians, Bulgarians, same deal, each one a different cultural identity. So in all these situations, on all three of these maps, if you're a different color than the part of the empire that controls everybody else, you didn't really want to be part of that empire. And that's where these revolutions seem to pop up more often. So, how was nationalism good for some countries? It was good for Italy and Germany. I put that in quotations for a reason. We'll talk about that in a second. Great Britain and France. Great Britain and France, Great Britain for the most part, with some exceptions like the Irish and sometimes the Scots, all felt allegiance to the British Empire. They were very proud of the fact that they were British, and that helped them grow stronger. French people, same thing. 95%, 99% of people in France are French, have a French cultural identity. So they were all working for the same team and not against each other. But Italy and Germany is an interesting thing because, like the other empires we just looked at, they were broken up into many different parts. But they kind of have the opposite problem. Even though they're broken up into different parts, they actually want to come together. For example, this is Italy in the 1830s and the 1840s. And if you notice, it's not one country, it's 9 different countries. But what's interesting is every single one of these countries, Sardinia, which is on the mainland and the island, Tuscany right here, the Papal States in the middle, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies to the south, Venetia and Lombardy to the north. Every single one of these 9 kingdoms spoke Italian, had an Italian cultural identity, and were all starting to think to themselves in the mid 1800s, why are we not one country Italy? We would be so much stronger if we all worked together. So whereas the Ottoman Empire and the Austrian Empire had cultural identities trying to break it apart, these small countries were trying to actually come together and be one unified Germany. Of course, if you're the king or prince in one of these small countries, you don't want that to happen because it means only one of you is actually going to have power if all of it were to unite. Same thing with Germany. Let's look at the German Confederation. Austria and Prussia dominate the German Confederation, but there's 37 other different countries that all speak German. And you got to wonder, they start to think, why are we not one united, strong Germany, right? Why don't we have one country that just dominates everybody else? So Prussia, right here, and Austria to the south, are actually going to compete to gobble up these territories that are all German people and try to be the German country that dominates the rest of Europe. So in the next section, what we're going to talk about is how Italy and Germany actually unite separately to become the country of Italy and the country of Germany. But to sum up what we just talked about in this video, nationalism was a dividing force for multinational empires. Those are empires with more than one cultural identity, multinational empires with many cultural identities. Nationalism was a unifying force for countries or regions with a common cultural identity, with everybody working towards the same team. And nationalism was putting stress on the balance of power in the mid-1800s. If all those German-speaking countries get together into one country, that's going to be a pretty powerful country. And in the next section, we're going to see how that actually comes to be.